And like I said, if insulin and cortisol aren't behaving, oxytocin's not behaving, everything else, infertility, early menopause, PMS, inflammation, cancer, all of our modern day diseases are at higher prevalence.
We're going to talk about one of the most important subjects, one of my favorite subjects. We're going to talk about hormone health. And if you could, can you start off by sharing what hormones are exactly and why do they matter?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, when we talk about hormones, they're chemical messengers, and really we call them chemical messengers, and they are produced by our glands and even our fat in our own body, and they communicate with different parts and other hormones and other molecules throughout our system. But we've always labeled them as chemistry, right, under chemistry, but they really are energetic molecules. They work at an energetic level that we haven't even really begun to understand. So I think this is where a lot of confusion comes in when, as patients, we're asking our doctors, and like a patient will come in, Dr. Anna, can you test, what's the best way to test my hormones? And I'll tell them, well, blood, saliva, urine, sweat. There's so many ways that we can really look at testing, but they're energetic molecules. So until we can really test at the energetic level, we'll be able to see how our hormones are flowing and fluctuating to make more sense when we're trying to evaluate them.
So essentially, we're just teeming with these hormones. It's hard to not find a place that we can test and find them.
Yes, I actually like to always think of the hormone hierarchy too. Because when we think we have hundreds of hormones in our body, and then we have master hormones that really work to govern and control these other hormones, and then we have a supreme master hormone. And so when I look at that, I say, I spent so much of my adulthood studying our reproductive hormones, and they're just part of the picture. So when we're talking about hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, even cortisol, and we look at all these other, there's so many hormones, thyroid hormones, there are just hundreds of them. But so I consider them, like, if you look at a university setup, consider all those hormones, the bulk of them, the student body. And then you have your professors in the classroom, so these master hormones. And I call that predominantly insulin and cortisol. Those are the two big master hormones. So when those professors are good teachers, while all the students have their own missions and their own talents and their own giftings, right? Their own purpose, when they're under good control, there's order and no chaos. And then the dean of the university or the president of the university is oxytocin, the most powerful hormone of our body, that hormone of love, joy, and connection. And when that hormone is in abundance in our body, everyone else is playing good together. And so we look at it that way. Then let's go to the top and let's work on our hormones top down versus much of what we do is bottom up. But you have to do it both ways.
Yeah, that's such a powerful analogy. And looking at what if those teachers are not that good, insulin and cortisol specifically. This reminds me of my third grade teacher, Mr. Ewing, and my art teacher, Mr. Dillon. True story. One day, it was art class. They rolled the television in the classroom, which is always a great event for a kid. Mm-hmm. And they put on 48 Hours, R-rated movie, Nick Nolte, Eddie Murphy, and then they went and got high. True story, third grade.
What chaos.
Yes.
Absolute chaos.
So what's going to happen with those children, the filtering down us little hormones, we're going to act up more than likely.
Absolutely.
All right. So.
Oh my God, that is a terrible story, Shawn. I'm like traumatized from that story.
I've got so many crazy stories like that. But yeah, so and I love that you mentioned oxytocin as being even in that kind of head of school position. Mm-hmm. We often don't think about that. Why is oxytocin so formidable?
I think because it's one of those very highly energetic molecules, right? It probably vibrates at one of the highest frequencies. It's the most alkalinizing hormone to our body versus like cortisol, the most acidifying hormone to our body. So it has like this high energy. It's the hormone of love, connection, the highest vibrations. I would say gratitude, joy, laughter, right? And these affection, all of these orgasm, of course, I'll keep listing all the ways, oxytocin raises our vibrations, but because oxytocin is hard to test. And again, I think that's like if I wanted to check your oxytocin level, I would have to quickly do a blood draw into a special tubing that I need to flash freeze and ship off rapidly to be tested at one of the two. As far as I know, there's still only two really, good labs that test for oxytocin levels. So there, maybe other ways to look at it, but I think it's a challenge because it's so volatile. But yet we give women oxytocin in labor, Pitocin. Pitocin is oxytocin. So it's stable in that way and can be supplemented with in some ways. But I think there's so little understood about it because it's not an easily replaced hormone. And nor would we want to. We want to build it up naturally. But there are times when we can prescribe it or replace it.
Got it. So one of the most remarkable things you've already shared is that our hormones, we tend to think about them in terms of just chemistry, but they're energetic. And truly, this is really getting to the root of what life is, what our bodies are. It's really energy and information. Yes. And so there's this really remarkable energy exchange happening with our hormones. And if these governing hormones are doing well, the rest of the hormones are going to have kind of this filter down effect and be working pretty good. But this gets us into the conversation that is very requested over the years, but we really haven't dug in on this, which is menopause and andropause. And there's so much unawareness about them. In fact, you shared in your book that only 20% of obstetricians and gynecologists receive formal training in menopausal medicine at all. So it's just like the folks that we're going to for these services for insight here barely receive any training.
Right.
Can you share how and why you became so passionate about this particular part of medicine personally?
There's an expression that your mess becomes your message. It's definitely true for me. At 39 years old, I was diagnosed with early menopause. And infertility, I'd failed the highest doses of fertility treatments. And then that piled on with the diagnosis of early menopause, told that I would never be able to have another child naturally again. And that led me on a journey around the world. As physicians, we give a diagnosis, and that's a label, right? That's a label. You're diabetic, you have heart disease, you're menopausal, you're infertile, right? And you sit with that like, oh, that's the end all be all. That is now who I am. And it's not true. And as a patient hearing that, so I had both ways, thinking, oh my gosh, well, that's it then, right? But yet there was this little seed of hope in me that was still there, because my husband and I at the time, we'd lost a child and we so wanted to have another child, but there was trauma and grief and despair and severe depression that I certainly was dealing with, and so there was an immense amount of physical trauma that was part of this entire experience. So it was one trauma after another trauma after another trauma. And that led me, I took a sabbatical from my medical practice for a year and traveled around the world. I went from the mountains of Peru to the volcanic soil of Indonesia to a Native American shaman to some of the leading scientists in Europe and New Zealand. And as a result of that journey, reversed my early menopause, naturally conceived the child I was told I would never be able to have at 41 years old. Her name's Ava Marie, so I thank God for her. And that changed my mentality. It changed my practice. There is a saying that we trained at Emory University, where I studied OBGYN. In the OR, they say the eyes don't see what the mind don't know. If you don't know there could be a problem there, you're not going to see it. And so that's so true in life. So all of a sudden my eyes were open to the incredible power. Like, wait, so this is all reversible. This is reversible. When we get to the underlying cellular issues, when we get to the foundation and we reset that foundation, all these other symptoms and syndromes that we like to label in medicine, right? We've got syndromes for everything. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? Menopausal syndrome, and the list goes on. So metabolic syndrome. So if we get to the cellular, if we can make a shift at that cellular level, mind, body, and spirit, can't do it without the three, mind, body, and spirit, all of that resolves. And so I've been blessed to see miraculous healings over and over and over again.
Wow. Just that one story you shared in the book that you went through menopause twice, and even just that headline is just like, what? How is this possible? And you just shared something really important, which is your experience, your mindset, your mental well-being is going to influence the onset of menopause.
Yes.
Right. So this is obviously a huge controller of your hormone health.
Stress. And so there's this consequence of stress, either post-traumatic stress or chronic everyday stress. Because as a scientist, I was a scientist before I went to med school. I did research in exercise physiology with U.S. Navy divers and the diving medicine department in Bethesda. And so looking at like, okay, physiology, what's going on here with my physiology? Like, how is this happening? And understanding that, with stress, of course, we have cortisol. And cortisol is going to be made at sacrifice of our reproductive hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. And so those are depleted during that time to make the life-saving hormone cortisol. And so if you don't have your reproductive hormones, you're not going to be able to get pregnant. You're not going to build muscle. You're going to have brain fog. You're going to feel weak and low energy, right? Your mitochondrial function starts to be depleted. So all of those things are starting to take place when you're shifting to cortisol. And cortisol is also very acidifying. And I can tell you later how I figured that out. That was fun. But so cortisol is going to break down your muscle and bone, right? At the sacrifice of everything else, you're going to make cortisol. And so that potent anti-inflammatory, it's a steroid hormone. And so the thing that I recognize, because there's the emotional trauma of post-traumatic stress and chronic everyday stress, and I write about this a little bit in menopause, but I go into detail in my story in my first book, The Hormone Fix. And when cortisol goes up, oxytocin goes down. And when cortisol's up for a long time, the paraventricular nucleus in the brain will shut down cortisol production. So all of a sudden you get this very dangerous state where cortisol's low and oxytocin's low. That's the physiology of burnout, physiology of divorce, physiology of I love my husband, I don't feel love for him. I love my work, but I don't feel like going in anymore. I know I love my kids. I just don't feel like doing anything. I feel disconnected. That's the physiology of disconnect. So you again have to re-energize the hormone oxytocin. You have to make that a priority all throughout your day to deal with to let go of the trauma, to let go of the past, to help reset your circadian cycle. And like I said, if insulin and cortisol aren't behaving, oxytocin's not behaving, everything else, infertility, early menopause, PMS, inflammation, cancer, all of our modern day diseases are at higher prevalence.
Holy mackerel. So you mentioned that cortisol can be acidifying, right? And like that's probably a new idea for a lot of people. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I had my second menopause at 48. So now I'm 56, definitely through menopause. I'm officially postmenopausal as of now, dropping my daughter off at high school for her first year. So when I was 48, I started going through the hot flashes, the night sweats, the mood swings, brain fog, memory loss. And, when you're probably the biggest symptoms, brain fog, memory loss, that's pretty bad. Because I'm thinking of my daughters were teenagers at the time. And when you've got brain fog and you're a single mom and you've got teenage girls at home, whew, they will take advantage of you. So, we went in elementary and my teenage daughters. But the worst thing, probably the most distressing one, was the weight gain of 20 pounds without doing anything different. Because Shawn, at one time I was well over 240 pounds. Lost that weight with a lot of what I teach. And then, this full-blown perimenopause and starting to gain that weight back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll be 300 pounds before this stops, right? What's going on? And so that took me to the ketogenic lifestyle. So I've used this. My oldest daughter has seizures, so I was familiar with ketogenic diet for her. I used it in neurologic patients in my medical practice and my low carb for my Candida patients. And so I was like, okay, I'm cutting out all carbs because I can't have this weight gain. And I know it's good for the brain. And I felt like I hit a wall. I didn't like how I felt. And I said, what is going on here? So I did one of the things that I used to do, and I used to always tell my patients to do, check your urine pH. Your urine pH is a biomarker for your health. We know the more alkaline your urine pH is, the less likelihood of many diseases of inflammation, cancer, heart disease, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, etc. And I was like, okay, well, why is that? Well, as I was checking my urine pH, initially it was as the pH paper didn't change color. It was as low as the pH paper read. So who knows? It was like peanut acid at the time. Who knows? It was like a pH of 5 according to the paper. But that's as low as it would read. So I was like, that was a huge aha moment. So then my body's inflamed. I need to add the minerals in. Now the keto world, because that was way back in 2014 when I was doing this, N of 1 research. And now the keto world's like, oh yes, you need your mineral salts, right? You talk about LMNT, you need, get those in. I like, just mix up your minerals. But for me, it was adding the greens, the alkalinizing the greens, feed the gut microbiome, which is important for estrogen detoxification. And so I started adding all the greens back, and I started to get more alkaline. But what I recognized is those mornings I would go walk on the beach or gratitude journal, my urine pH was more alkaline all day. And so going to physiology, when cortisol increases hydrogen ion secretion across the renal tubules of the kidney, acidifying your urine. So cortisol was doing that. So the opposite is true. Oxytocin, and this is what, if you just test your urine pH, I'm telling you, it is game changing, the information it will give you, because you can do like an terribly acidifying meal, but you're having fun, or you have a great night of sex, a lot of oxytocin going, and you are going to be so alkaline that next day or when you wake up in the morning. So oxytocin is the most alkalinizing. So that's why it's not just about diet. It's a piece of the puzzle. But positivity, kindness, gratitude, that mindset, everything we can do to increase oxytocin and decrease cortisol improves our physiology.
Wow. This is a great warning. If you're overstressed, you're going to be pissing acid.
Yes, exactly.
That's crazy. That is so crazy. Thank you so much for sharing that. In your book, you also report that specifically demonstrating how American women suffer greater menopausal symptoms than women in other places around the globe. And you ask the question, is our diet to blame? Why is this a potential reason here?
Yeah, I think, I've always been fascinated with world travel. I've traveled extensively in my lifetime, and I love it. And I would witness other women of different cultures, what they were doing, and especially how the matriarchs of the family and the elders in the family were perceived. And so I looked at also, we know the Blue Zone research that looks at several things, including diet, but there's conflicting pieces in the diet. But yet I wanted to understand what were the foods that they relied on in menopause that helped alleviate their symptoms, because food is medicine. And way back to the Turkish Empire, the physicians to the king prepared their food, right? They were their chefs. So food is medicine. So that's why I wanted to see what was going on and explore different foods from around the world. In the Middle East, I'm half Middle Eastern, and something like tabbouleh, which is a parsley salad, which, just a little aside, it really should be 99% parsley, not all that cracked wheat and all that other stuff in there. But I use a recipe in my book with chopped Brussels sprouts, broccoli sprouts in there to give it that crispy instead of the cracked wheat. But because parsley is the natural diuretic, it's a hormone balancer, it feeds the microbiome, it's so nutritious, it's an important food staple. And so in looking at the different foods as medicine that other cultures have incorporated to give ourselves diversity in our diet, and the more diverse our diet is, the healthier our gut microbiome, the more resilient we are to stress and disease.
It just makes sense.
Makes sense.
It really does make sense. And you said that, quote, this is a great quote from your book, all health begins with nutrient-rich foods.
Yes.
All health begins with nutrient-rich foods. Yes. That's a powerful statement to make.
Yes.
But this is getting back to a really foundational principle that even when we're in this conversation about hormones, our hormones are made from the food that we eat. Yeah. Of course they're going to have influence, but, I think one of the things that was not surprising, but for you to articulate it, the fact that American women suffer greater menopausal symptoms than other places around the world, like it should be really eye-opening. Like, what's going on here specifically that's causing this outcome? What is it?
Yeah, well, I think it's that concept of nutrient-rich food devoid of endocrine disruptors and toxins. Because much of the food, like we are what we eat, ate, right? And what they were injected with and what their food was sprayed with, et cetera. We're seeing that more and more. And because the U.S. has really liberal policies for food contamination.
Liberal.
Or treatment.
That's a very delicate way to put it, kind way to put it.
Well, compared to anywhere, right, exactly. Compared to anywhere else in Europe, what we allow in this country is really atrocious. And we know that endocrine disruptors continue to keep in our food chain. So being able to get whole foods, organic foods, fresh, as close to the source is a part of what's necessary for good health and life, and using things like herbs and spices and sprouted foods. And sprouting foods yourself is another potent way to, on a budget, get really good nutrients into your body. And then again, the meat we eat, I can't emphasize enough how important free-range, organic, no antibiotic injected meat is, or hormone injected meat is, because we are getting all of that in through. And dairy is a big one. We talked before we started about acne and women's health, and dairy. Eliminating dairy is one of the first things that I do for my clients. You want to eliminate dairy and improve detoxification so that you can have good, healthy skin, because there's so much endocrine disruptors in dairy. Oh my gosh, Shawn, I was at my boxing trainer the other morning, and he does it in his garage at his house in East Dallas. And his little daughter, she was 7, she came in, Daddy, like she was crying. I was like, why is she crying? What's going on? She goes, she wants chocolate milk. And I was like, she wouldn't, I was thinking, oh my God, that my mind was like, what's in chocolate milk that's making her so addicted to chocolate milk? Like, certainly the chocolate, the sugar, the milk. She's like, do kids cry for water and sparkling? I mean, do they, how can we shift that, that mentality? But you see the addictions start early to something that's not good for us.
One of the great things about today is that we have scientific method and the ability to kind of extract and find out what is behind the scenes with our addiction to something like dairy. And dairy has casomorphines, right? And so these literally fit into these kind of opiate receptors. So I'm going to share the study. I actually just looked this up. And the study states that, quote, casomorphine is a more potent opioid than morphine itself and is responsible for most of the typical behavioral and cognitive symptoms of conditions like autism, for example. So it's affecting our cognitive function. And as you know, autism rates have exploded in recent decades, and behavioral issues and skin issues, and the list goes on. And we often don't attribute it to what we're eating. Again, we have this very drug-first culture trying to treat the symptom and not looking at something so kind of inconspicuous as dairy being a potential trigger.
Yeah, and again, the hormones that are in dairy, right? If we're injecting cows and treating them with hormones to increase their milk production and antibiotics to keep them producing more as well, then we're ingesting that as well. So we're getting our daily dose of antibiotics. And not only, what I've seen as a gynecologist is the increase in symptomatic polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? Because these girls are I always call them you're my Amazonians, right? You're my Pocahontas, you're my Mulan, you're my, you're an Amazonian. You have Amazonian genetics, and like the Native Americans, for instance, those are warrior genes. They're not diabetes genes and fat genes. And we look at our epigenetics and think of, well, our genes were designed for your survival and your endurance activities and your leadership activities. Those are my PCOS girls. But what they're taught in America is that you've got acne, fat genes, you're going to have trouble getting pregnant. And that's what they're taught. I'm like, you are a warrior princess. Let's get off the dairy. Let's balance you. I use my product, Mighty Maca Plus. I use that because it's detoxifying. We need to detox out those, congested cellular receptors. We need to detox the liver, and we need to support her in doing that. And those two things, and then working, okay, no dairy, ideally no gluten or grains. Let's try to eliminate that too, to decongest the system so you can absorb as many micronutrients as possible. So, and that, my clients will come back in 6 weeks. I no longer have symptoms. My periods are regular. The PMS is gone. My skin cleared up. And if we're seeing that at the onset of puberty, we're also seeing it at the other side in perimenopause and menopause. We're seeing the conflict of hormones and endocrine disruptors and, and poor nutrition and also not just what we eat, but when we eat, right? Like, so we're seeing way too much of carbs in our American lifestyle, and that's not conducive to a menopausal body. Yeah. It's not conducive to our menopausal hormonal milieu at that point, because as we age, we become more insulin resistant naturally. So that's why we have to shift to eat lower carb food and space it out. So no more snacking. And I know that's like anti-American apparently when I say that, but it's so critical for a woman's body in the menopause to use food as medicine to help her transition to be the best second, to enjoy the best second spring of her life.
Yeah. You're tying in so many different facets of medicine and nutrition into your book as well, even, mentioning circadian medicine here with when we're eating and how that influences our hormones. But, it's so fascinating. You also mentioned pulling out dairy. When you've got just a point of clarification here, the dairy predominantly that we're consuming is very different from what our ancestors were having, and also cultures that have that closer relationship, and even, the enzymes to be able to properly metabolize it, all that stuff. In our society, we'll just take something to try to buffer the pain that we might experience. Or sometimes it's not a digestive pain. It can be, a manifestation on our skin, and we don't really put the pieces together to understand that this is a very hormone dense substance. It's what it's made for, is to grow an animal, right? And not to vilify it. It just has to be something that actually works for your body, and also the quality needs to be of the utmost importance, especially if you're dealing with health issues. But you mentioned something too. You mentioned potentially pulling out gluten too, and I mentioned casomorphines, but there's also gluteomorphines
exactly
as well. Like, why do we tend to be so addicted? I would have people coming in when I was working as a nutritionist. People would come in and they're like, just don't take my bread. Yeah. All right, I'll do whatever you say, but just don't take my bread away. Before I've even said anything, It's just like, it's kind of like a little bit of a problem, It's like an addictive thing that can happen. Right. And it's so fascinating to see it and to see our behavior, but it's also really remarkable to see what happens when we start to, as Dr. Amen says, love food that loves us back versus having this relationship with abusive foods. Well, this is a great part to talk about some of the conventional treatments for symptoms of menopause. And again, this is something you really brought to the surface for folks in your book, and also in your last book as well, because there's a standard of care. It's not uncommon, for example, for someone experiencing hot flashes to be prescribed an antidepressant, right?
Right, exactly. And when a patient comes in to, our office and they're complaining of hot flashes, night sweats, they're antidepressant medications that are listed or as options for patients, and that's the treatment versus getting to underlying reason. And this is, hot flashes and night sweats are one of the most aggravating symptoms that women experience next to weight gain in the menopause. And the thing is, in our modern, when I trained 30 years ago in OBGYN, it was, menopause, will usually last 1 to 2 to 5 years, right? No, it's 15 years. And for some women I've worked with, they've had hot flashes for 20 years. And because we think, there's an estrogen deficiency issue. But what I found, because I learned this after the fact, my clients started their hot flashes, they've had them for 20 years and they're gone in 2 weeks. Well, because a unknown cause of hot flashes is insulin resistance. So the more insulin resistant you are, the more you have those aggravated hot flashes over time. So that's a large majority of women that have these unrelenting hot flashes. So you've shifted your diet to address the hot flashes, balance the hormones. And when I balance hormones, I always start with I like to say, I do hormone replenishment, not hormone replacement, because I don't want to replace what God's given you to produce, to work in your body. I want to support you through this transition, this difficult time, and maybe for the rest of your life with a little extra support. But first, I want your body to use what it's making and to make more of what it needs to make in the most natural way possible. So I'm going to support your glandular function. And I think this is a problem. I'm going to hit on andropause a second, because so many men are just given testosterone. And we know that testosterone, like unopposed testosterone, first of all, where is it going? It's going to go to dihydrotestosterone, or it will go to estrogen. So, but also your given testosterone will also deplete or suppress your body's ability to make testosterone, hence the testicular shrinkage that they'll warn you about. And we can counteract that by administering Clomid and HCG. And so we can counteract that, but it's more money and it's more time and it's more nuanced, and not all physicians are trained that way. But if I'm replacing you and suppressing your body's natural ability to make it, what's going to happen? And this is what people don't know. Yes, like a sign of low testosterone can be depression. But if I replace your testosterone and then take it away from you, you stop it, that creates severe depression. That can be suicidal depression. And men aren't told that. They're not counseled. Physicians prescribing it, who have been trained by some big testosterone replacement company, I'm not naming any, aren't told that if the client just comes in and goes, doesn't come back, I mean, that's a medical risk factor for severe depression and suicidal depression. And I think that's really important, especially when they're jacking it up, testosterone levels too high versus replenishment. Let me help you during this stage and support your body to make its own levels of testosterone more. So I start top down: pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA, then maybe testosterone and estrogen. And I think the combination works great in the right patient using the right, bioidentical hormones. That makes a really big difference for both men and women. But I don't want to ever suppress what our body, at least, I don't ever want to suppress what our body's able to make. And then if we are replacing it, we need to make sure that we're getting rid of it safely too.
Yeah. Just basically, you're helping us to stack conditions in our favor for our body to sort things out and balance itself, which it's designed to do. Oftentimes, we're just kind of getting in the way of that natural process. I just realized something when you were talking just now that, and this is so fascinating, I never really thought about this. You already mentioned how cortisol is such a powerful factor in all of this. And I just thought about that temperature regulating place in our body really is taking place in the hypothalamus, right? And then we have the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, right? And so it's inherently connected.
Adrenal gonadal axis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. And so it just really makes sense when we're talking about something like hot flashes and the hypothalamus being placed under stress. And one of the big issues today in the data, and this was from Albert Einstein College of Medicine, really highlighting this epidemic of hypothalamic inflammation contributing to higher rates of insulin resistance and obesity and insulin resistance creating more hypothalamic inflammation, which is this, again, it's one of the many things it's doing, but it's helping to regulate your body temperature.
Right.
Holy moly.
Right. That's a beautiful connection.
Oh my gosh. Like it really, so how often when folks are going in to their physician for treatment, they're dealing with this thing. You just said somebody's experienced this for 20 years. It's crazy. But not only, but even in a smaller instance where it's several years, whereas you even shared in your book that in other countries, there are women who don't generally even experience a lot of the symptoms that women here in the United States and also kind of industrialized Western type countries are experiencing. And the process is much more graceful and natural. But part of this issue, when you're going in to see a physician, they're not talking to you about insulin resistance.
Right.
Instead, again, here's an antidepressant to treat the symptom of the hot flashes. Oh my gosh.
Yep. And then I think there's so much here. So what I've been blessed to witness through cultures from around the world is that approach, right? Is the more of a holistic approach, more of a natural approach, but also how do people live and what are they being fed? What's their food like? When are they being fed? I just came back from Italy. And, between like 2:30 and 7:30, there's no one's going to serve you food. You're just not going to get it, especially in the countryside or whatever. The restaurants are closed. In other words, no snacking, no food for you. Do your work, go play, do whatever, right? And so I think that's the intermittent, I would say intermittent fasting, no snacking. Those are key essentials to have insulin sensitivity to support healthy metabolism and healthy brain function. It all ties in. So when I mentioned my story, I had the brain fog and the weight gain and all that, and getting keto green is what I call it. That's my trademark. Is getting keto green helped me certainly lose the weight, but it lifted the brain fog, because ketosis, this is important, I want your audience to know this, our brain, like, where did the brain fog go? Like, going into ketones, where does the brain fog go? But in women and men, estrogen metabolism in the brain, glucose metabolism in the brain is estrogen dependent. It's probably more progesterone dependent, but gluconeogenesis in the brain is dependent on our hormones. As our hormones transition and deplete, it's like our brain is suffocating for fuel. But we shift to ketosis, to using ketones for fuel, which is not hormone dependent, and the light bulb's back on. So that's why I say it's not just a good idea in menopause, it's a mandatory. And when we do this, we have better brain function, cognition. When I was 48, there was no way I could write books. Now I have 3 best-selling books. It blows my mind. But it's this brain function that I have that is from the lifestyle, the food that we eat, when we eat it, right? Intermittent fasting, but we have to become more insulin sensitive. And you said when you go into your doctor's office, there are 4 key markers, 4 key blood test markers I want all my patients to monitor and optimize. And that really gives us a good overall head to toe snapshot of how our body's doing. And one of them is the hemoglobin A1C. And many times physicians are just watching that number increase, if they're checking it on a regular basis, until it gets flagged. But it's been going up for 10 years. So we have the opportunity to intervene early on with, diet and lifestyle, because that's how we regulate insulin. Yeah. So it's crazy.
This, of course, it's Captain Obvious when you're saying it, but, again, we have this standard of care, and another one of the conventional treatments, I've got to ask you about this, standard hormone therapy. Today, obviously, it's a standard of care, but you share in the book that it may help to subdue some symptoms, but it can possibly increase the risk of having a heart attack, stroke, or even breast cancer.
Yeah. So that's based on research from the Women's Health Initiative study, because most hormone replacement, what that study looked at estrogen alone, but Premarin, it looked at a combination of estrogens, pregnant mare's urine. So we used, Wyeth Ayers was a big funder for the study, and so they actually worked for them for a couple of years before I went to med school. So in the drug metabolism department. So I understand drug chemistry. So anyway, Premarin and then the combination Prem-Pro, which these are oral estrogens and oral progestins, a synthetic progestin. This hormone replacement that was being used was not like bioidentical or body identical, that is now becoming a more popular term. It's it's not. So oral estrogens, the study showed the combination oral estrogen and the progestin, so the Prem-Pro combination, increased all 3 of those things. But the estrogen alone arm didn't increase the risk of breast cancer, but it did increase the risk of stroke. But we know from data that goes into the 1990s and early 2000s, so that was published in 2002, but we have data from the 1990s that shows that oral estrogen increases your inflammatory blood markers and increases, we know that can increase your risk of stroke. So increase is a marker that I have, another marker I like my clients to check, and that's HSCRP, highly sensitive C-reactive protein, or cardio C-reactive protein. So looking at inflammation at a lower level. So, but oral estrogens increase that. And so that increases your risk of stroke. So if we can use transdermal, vaginal, and I like troches, there are certainly many ways that we can take hormones, but what's the safest way for the longest amount of time that we can be on hormones? And that's a very individual timeline too.
Yeah, it would take a considerable amount of attention to try to dial this stuff in for folks. And I love it because you're giving people the tools where they can start to do the most important work, which is that inner investigation and really listening to your body. But we end up getting into a situation where we're fighting within ourselves all the time, and then we're just seeking a instant solution, which a lot of this stuff, it creates a lot of obviously additional stress in our life, going through that process, and it can diminish our quality of life. So we just want to feel better. And so we'll pretty much do whatever's put in front of us sometimes, especially again, if we want to get out of pain, if we want to get out of discomfort. But what you're really doing is you're creating such a level of empowerment, which is so cool. And I love it because you are a representation of it. Like, you went through menopause twice, you're right. And so what it looks like to have an early onset or stress induced version of it, and then the more natural version of it, and how to navigate those waters and tell the story from the perspective of a physician in this field. It's incredible, and we have access to this today, which is so cool. So by the way, get a copy of Menopause like yesterday. Get it for a friend in need. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Isn't that how
That's right.
goes?
That's right.
So I want to ask you about this as well, because this is one of the great aspects, and you're tying in again. We mentioned circadian medicine. We're talking about hormones today, but you also talk about how our gut health plays into hormone health and menopause as well. You shared data from Harvard denoting how structured dietary changes made significant changes to gut bacteria in just 3 days.
Yeah.
So how does this all tie together?
So I think what's really interesting is that, there's so much to this when it comes to what we know about the microbiome, right? Because when I was training, we were really interested in genetics, right? The genetics must determine the end all be all of our health, but it's not true. It's the microbiome, which is a huge part of that, the epigenetics, and how we're interacting with these trillions of organisms. And so in working with healing a woman with hormone therapy, for instance, if I'm using transdermal hormone therapy, or I'm trying to get her hormones straight, if her gut's messed up, there's no way I can. I've got to fix the gut to help her. And I was thinking about this when you were talking earlier, just a typical example in my medical practice, when a patient would come in and have all these symptoms, right? The perimenopause symptoms, the brain fog, the night sweats, the weight gain. They fill out a questionnaire that I have, and it's off the chart, right? And I would say, okay, I'm going to draw your blood work, and I'm going to see you back in a few weeks to go over your results. But in the meantime, you have to do this. And essentially, you follow this, follow the modified elimination diet meal plan. Let's, support your detoxification pathways. And they come back in. I haven't prescribed a single thing yet. And they come back in, doctor, I'm 90% better. I'm like, I feel like better than I have in decades without any prescription. And that was empowering. It was empowering for me in my own journey. It's like, it's within me, right? I don't need this prescription. I don't need this drug, or necessarily, I no longer have a need for these. That is empowerment. And I think women, through our medical systems, have given so much of our power away to birth control pills, to prescription drugs. I see clients on young ages on antidepressant medications and suppressive therapies, and it's if we get to the root cause, that we can heal these things. So in menopause, because I've been working with women online now, as well, in the keto green diet and lifestyle. It's just more than what we eat, called the keto green way. So it's a lifestyle too. But we get stuck sometime. And that's why menopause is 5 different menu plans, because I got to address the gut. So the keto green extreme plan is following an autoimmune protocol. So it's no nightshades, peppers, etc. So that is a 6-day plan to say, okay, if you're not getting where we need you, let's take this next step. And then there's the plant-based plan, because so many people doing keto, they're not getting the plant foods that are necessary for gut microbial diversity, which goes back to that Harvard study. In 3 days with plant foods, and again, they're low carbohydrate plant foods, that you can really increase good gut diversity, which increases your resilience and your immune system, which is what we want. And then the third plan is more carnivore, because sometimes our gut is so messed up, we can't, our digestive system is so messed up, we can't digest the plant foods. So we go carnivore for a little bit to boost up the protein, the amino acids, and to support your healing journey there. And then I did a cleanse plan. And then sometimes my clients have been, carb restricted for so long, we actually have to carb up. So then there's the favorite plan for everyone is the carb up plan.
Yeah. So first of all, the word that's coming up for me is like the audacity. How could you integrate all these different diet frameworks that tend to be at odds with each other into one book, right? Yeah. And you're giving people real world options, because each of these frameworks have a tremendous amount of science behind them. Yeah. And many of the physicians who are like the leading voices of each framework, they're seeing results with their patients. That's why they implement these strategies. But the thing is, each of these protocols is not the end all be all, right? It's for that person right now, and that is likely to change. What if you don't have another option in your tool belt and you just keep thinking, this is the thing that helped me right now and it's no longer working. I just need to keep banging away at this thing that's not working.
Exactly.
And so you're given permission and also valid frameworks along with the food, along with the lifestyle, to help to support where you are right now on your journey. It's pretty cool.
Thank you.
And that's actually, I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you why you put these different meal plans into menopause, and you just answered that so elegantly. So now we can talk a little bit about what are some of the best foods specifically. You mentioned parsley, surprisingly, earlier, but what are some of the best foods that we can eat to support our hormone health and just to help us to have a longer health span in general?
Yeah, definitely like meat, right? Grass-fed, free range, that's a great option. We want protein. We need high quality protein and amino acids. So that's important. And again, we are what we eat. So recognizing that, fish. So we always want to make sure that's important. That's, a key aspect. And then healthy fats like olive oil and avocado. We were talking earlier, you can add avocado to most anything to make it creamier. So avocado ice cream, avocado, add a little bit to your smoothies, or my avocado chocolate mousse recipe. So avocado is a superfood and I love it. And then the greens, the microgreens that help with estrogen detoxification, because men and women are getting too much estrogen from what we eat, the hormone disruptors, impaired detoxification pathways for both men and women. I have to empower estrogen detoxification. So those foods that help are your cruciferous vegetables like the broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and broccoli sprouts, alfalfa sprouts. Using sprouted food is so healthy. So looking at the power of sprouts for that estrogen detoxification, that's important. And, I'm a foodie. I grew up, my mom was a baker. I have family that are chefs and sommeliers, and I love food. So I also wanted to incorporate recipes from around the world, but always think healthy fat, high quality protein, and a good plate of low carbohydrate greens. And then add some citrus and salt, a little bit extra oil, and that is flavor bombs. And so using herbs and spices are also really powerful. And that's how we got them. Garlic is a medicinal food. Turmeric is a medicinal food, these herbs and spices. So I use those a lot in my plans and my recipes. Maca, I'm a big fan of maca because it was part of what helped me on my journey in recovering my early infertility. That was one piece of it. So I think those are some of my favorite foods. And then just remembering, like with what we're eating, not to drink with your meal, but between your meal, so you're not diluting your digestive enzymes, so you get the benefit of all that you're eating during your meal.
Yeah. Everything you just shared has been utilized for thousands upon thousands of years in human health and nutrition. It's just kind of integrated into the fabric of humanity, really what has made us and associated with our genes all this time. And I think it's always like a really good kind of benchmark or a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel to say, hey, you can rely on these foods that we've evolved with versus Captain Crunch.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And so with that said, pointing back to when you mentioned animal protein and the importance of having dense sources of amino acids specifically, because those, when we even talk about hormones, again, I love that you, of course, mentioned the energetic capacity, that chemical capacity. These are proteins at its truest sense. And so if you're not giving your body the raw materials to make this stuff, guess what? We're going to have some problems. We might have some deficiencies. And also, just circling back, when you talked about estrogen and the brain fog, and these are some other things that we don't really think about. It's, these hormones are critical, even estrogen. We just related to it being a sex hormone, but it's important for your cognitive function.
Muscle.
Yep. Yeah.
If I hadn't lived the experiences I lived, I wouldn't have known, because it's not something we're taught in med school, right? There's not an abundance amount of research on lifestyle factors that improve your overall health. We're getting there, especially not in the menopausal woman, right? And so I think it's this, again, the eyes don't see what the mind don't know, but now you know it, you can see it. Like, why is fasting part of every religious culture? So you have that heightened energy, vibration, and clarity. That's a ketogenic state. That's a ketotic state. So you're using jet fuel to have that higher vibration, that higher connection to spirit. And I always think that fasting out in nature with hikes, etc., that's your alkalinizer, right? So that's the combination that when you have both together, it's just a powerful physiology.
Let's talk about how obesity and carrying excess weight prior to menopause can lead to more severe symptoms when menopause hits.
Yeah, definitely. That's part of the insulin resistance issue. Plus, fat makes estrogen. So you have estrogen dominance and insulin resistance at the same time. So more significant, typically, problems with menstrual cycles, heavier bleeding, increased risk of endometrial cancer. So we see that as a gynecologist. Then the mood swings, the anxiety, the depression, those are, that symptoms of estrogen dominance, because it's progesterone insufficiency. And again, when you have more insulin resistant, also that's creating that increased number of hot flashes and blood sugar swings. And so willpower is an issue, craving is an issue, and it makes it really hard to turn that trajectory and lose weight. So you have to do the combination of the food and the lifestyle to do that.
This would be a great PSA for us to really focus on getting ourselves healthier prior to the onset of menopause. Like, just create some cultural shifts, of course. Mm-hmm. But, you give great insights for that, the pre, the during, and the post as well. But I want to loop in here andropause.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the same things are going to be seen with andropause. First of all, could you share a little bit about what andropause is? And you mentioned something earlier about testosterone going to estrogen.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So as, for guys and women, our hormones will fluctuate over our lifespan. So for both men and women in our 20s, our DHEA levels start to decline. DHEA is a precursor to testosterone and estrogen production. So DHEA will make testosterone and estrogen, but then testosterone will also convert to estrogen. It has that two-way conversion. And so as we're aging, testosterone levels will start to decline over time. So this decline over time is this andropause, when testosterone levels are low. We consider that ages 50, 60. For men, typically, we're seeing, we used to say 60, but we're seeing it earlier, certainly, and seeing guys in their 40s with low testosterone, if not younger. So this low testosterone, always think what's causing it to be low first. That's so important. Address the endocrine disruptors, get rid of those, improve detoxification, support the gut, support the adrenal glands so your body is producing more of its own DHEA and then testosterone naturally. So I think that's an important thing for guys to realize. I always think of, and it's never too late. It's never too early and never too late. What I hate seeing in medical practice, because I've consulted for, hormone replacement clinics around the country in the past. And what I hate to see is when someone who's young is on hormone replacement because it's suppressing their body's own natural production without ever, I mean, we may need to do it for a short time to support them through a crisis, but we have to address the underlying reason. Why is the testosterone low to begin with? You know, just like in women, why are we having these symptoms? Address the underlying issue, address the estrogen dominance, and you feel amazing in just a few weeks. That's crazy versus Prozac, birth control pills, surgery, which is the standard of care. So you go through all those things, and the next thing your gynecologist is like, well, I've done everything I can. Here's a good divorce attorney and psychiatrist for you, right? So with andropause, can I share a story? I think this is one please. Of, as I learned through my own health journey, I've been able to experiment, of course, on my family. My dad was 79 years old. My mom had passed away many years earlier due to heart disease. That's why I'm so passionate about women's health, especially during menopause. I saw her suffer unnecessarily with diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And by the time of her death, Shawn, she was on 11 medications, no two of which were ever studied together, which is pretty much around the board. There's very few studies that look at combination therapies. Anyway, so Dad was 79 years old at this time, and he came to visit us. He went from Philadelphia to Georgia, where I was living, and they had to wheel him through the airport because he was short of breath walking. And to know my dad was born in 1926, joined World War II at 17, was a naval attaché, spoke 4 languages, could basically get anyone drunk and to talk about anything. That was my dad. He was a fun guy. And so he was cranky and irritable and just sitting on the couch. And I was like, Dad, what's going on? He said, Anna, I just don't feel good. And I said, let me call your doctor. And so I called his cardiologist, who I knew. And I said, Dad's having, I listed off the symptoms. This is what's going on. And he said, Anna, your dad's 79. He's lived a good life.
Wow.
And that was it. There was no additional comments. And I said, okay, so would you mind if I intervene? My gynecologist, I can't hurt him too bad. And so he said, sure. And I said, Dad, are you done living? And he said, I go, your cardiologist is done with you. Are you done? He goes, I'd like to see 80. And so I said, okay. He goes, Anna, I don't feel good. I'll do whatever you say. In 30 days, this diabetic, 79-year-old man, obese, big beer belly, he went from, he lost 30 pounds in 30 days. He went from injecting 120 units of insulin in his, fat every day to 20 units of insulin every day. So from 120 to 20 in 30 days. I took him off of 3 medications. I put him on microdose of testosterone. I put him on CoQ10 and a few other supplements. And not only did he live to see his 80th birthday, but we celebrated 91 good years with him.
Oh my gosh.
91 good years. Smart brain function, smart, and he traveled the world. He flew international, and he lived. He lived, and he was the oldest of 4 brothers, all who died before him. And wow. By decades, he outlived the quality of life of his genetic pool. And so I think that's what's empowering, is that we need to know when we do the little things, when we address the underlying inflammation and metabolic disruption, balance the hormones at any age naturally, right? We, as much as possible, we affect the quality of life of generations.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
What if I told you these are diseases of skeletal muscle first? And that obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease begin in skeletal muscle first. Insulin resistance begins in skeletal muscle first. And if we care about root cause medicine, then we have to care about skeletal muscle.